up, though, y'all? It's your boy Herb.
And it's your girl Mo.
And welcome to our soon-to-be world-renowned podcast, Young, Black, and Figuring It Out. What up, though?
What it do?
Whatever we tell it.
You know.
You feel me?
Yeah, no.
At some point in time, it's going to be like whatever it feels like. That's how life be going every now and then.
I mean, I'm happy today, so.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And life do be doing whatever it feels like, but sometimes it be good.
Yeah.
A lot of the times it be good.
Most of the time it be good.
We ain't got no complaints, gang. I'm excited today.
Yes.
How you feeling?
So good and so nervous.
Yeah, because it's going to be, this topic's hitting home.
A little trigger.
I know. And yeah, this is a good topic. And I think growing up in the church, which we'll talk about in a second, this is going to hit home. But let's set the stage a little bit for what we're talking about. So the concept, to be real, we ain't got the title yet, y'all. But the concept of this episode is dealing with church trauma.
Yeah.
And usually before we jump into any of this, we would do our what did you figure out today? But we ain't got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Y'all know why we ain't got time for that? Why we ain't got time for that?
We got a special guest.
We got a special guest. Let's go ahead and clap it up for Miss Harmony in the building. You feel me? What up, though? So Miss Harmony.
Going on?
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
What's going on, beautiful people? It's your girl. It's your Nisi Poo. It's your Bookie Boo Boo or whatever. It's your teacher. It's your it's your homegirl, Miss Harmony, coming at you live. What's up, beautiful people? How y'all doing?
I'm so dead. That was great.
That was good.
That's
That
a
was like-
regular. You got to come up with your
Keep it
brand.
up, yeah.
You know, you got to make sure that people know who you are. Right? Gotta be loud, you know. But hey, y'all, what's good?
Talk to us.
I'm
Tell
Miss
us about
Harmony.
you.
Well, I'm Miss Harmony Malone. I'm from Ithaca, New York. I grew up there. I have a lot of family legacy there. My great-grandfather was Bishop Cecil A. Malone, and he has a week dedicated in his honor. But I do a lot of work in community. I'm known as a community mother, an activist, an advocate, a teacher, a lover of many things. Mostly dance is my passion. That's my jam. You know, I like to make the people excited. But my love really is literally just giving people permission to be who they be in spaces, which is a dancer. I educate people through conversational performance. I have worked in various positions as the after-school program director of a historically Black community center in Ithaca, Southside Community Center.
Shout out to the Southside.
Southside.
You feel
I've
me?
also worked at the Greater Ithaca Activity Center, which is for the city of Ithaca, and been my Brother's Keeper Initiative program coordinator.
Shout out to GIAC.
Yeah, so shout out to GIAC, and now I'm at Island Health and Fitness, and I am the operations supervisor there, and I will be transitioning soon to teach for America in Hawaii. So I'm just
Hey, about to be
So
in
she just moving.
Hawaii.
Wow. I
Me?
mean, royalty and greatness all over here. You feel
You know what I mean?
Thank you, baby. Trying to build a legacy.
We love to hear that here.
Yeah, we love legacy. You feel me? Good. Well, I'm glad that we're excited and that we bring all this positive energy because this topic, it got some heat to it.
It's spicy.
But it's good, though. I think this is the fact that we're even talking about this is important because this often is not talked about, which can lead to some of the things that are part of this topic, the church trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so just to start us off, if we could, before we get into the details and deep and really dive in into the topics that we about to dive into. Maybe if we should talk about our own, I think we should talk about our own church background or upbringing, or where did we come up in, right? I'll go first because I asked. I set y'all up,
Praise the Lord.
I'm going to let people.
I saw it coming. I was like, yes, he got to take one for the team
Yeah,
right
because
now.
I do that all the time. It's like, we didn't know you was going to ask that, brother. Okay, so for me, I grew up in, it was the Church of Christ. And Church of Christ is so my grandmother is my grandma. Love you, Grandma Fly. She is, when I say the church mom, and the epitome of, if you think of our culture's Black church grandmothers, committed and faithful, and the church is her bedrock. It also is an expectation for people around her family. You not, before COVID and whatnot, we wasn't going up there to visit because she lives in New York City. We wasn't going to visit without going to church.
Right.
And she would be at church Sunday. She at the Bible school on Wednesday. If it's something happening on Thursday, grandma was churching it. You know what I'm saying? And that passed down to us. So my mom, I grew up in Detroit, so she moved there. We grew up in Oakland Church of Christ, which was, for me, a lot of it was community spiritually, but also just, it was, black men there, right? So that was really the upbringing. The Church of Christ, though, with that, is very, the denomination itself is very, and this is my opinion, rule-based, to the point where it's like, and this is one of the things I questioned and still question, but it had like a line like in the Bible, sing unto the Lord with spiritual hymns. And this is how I learned it from there, right? And so we didn't use instruments.
Right.
Like, oh, you risking your soul. And it's like, whoa, you know what I'm saying? So I'm not judging that, but it was, well, I kind of am. But it's like, that was how rule-based, that's how rule-based it was. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so that was my upbringing in the church. To be honest, our family wasn't like heavily religious though. We were committed to a church and church family, but it wasn't like heavily religious because real life was still going on outside of that, right? That's how we deemed it.
Right.
So that was my upbringing. You know?
Yeah.
And pass it on.
Oh yeah, very different.
Talk about that.
I have been in the church since birth. I am pretty confident I was born in the church. You know what I mean? I went to Pentecostal. It was, I don't even remember the name. BPA, Brooklyn Pentecostal Assembly. I'm pretty sure is the name.
Brooklyn.
From like 0 to 12. Then I went to Emmanuel Christian Mission. This is all in Brooklyn until 15 or so. I think I dabbled in some Brooklyn Tabernacle. I was just like, we were big church hoppers and never really stayed in one church. I ended up at Day Bar, which was a non-denominational church, which was a little different because it wasn't Pentecostal for me. But just very, speaking in tongues was a big thing. And everyone just laying hands and praying. And that was always kind of the culture or spiritual culture I was around until about 17 or so. And my mom changed churches again. And I ended up at King's Church of Christ, but this one was in Brooklyn. And I was there until... I came out here.
Because that's how we really met.
That's how I slid in his DMs when I saw that he went to Church of Christ. I was like, yo.
She slid in my DMs. Y'all like, hey, you trying to go to church? I'm like, okay.
Because he had a car and I didn't.
I need a ride.
Yeah.
Not I need a ride.
I was being used, yes.
And that's how we became friends.
That's legit what happened, though.
Thank you, Church of Christ. So similarly, when I got to Church of Christ, it was very different because I was accustomed to the first, 18 years of my life.
Yeah.
Instruments. I mean, my uncle was playing the drums and the organist. I loved the organist. And then people play piano, and everyone had the cymbals, and it was very different, very lively. And then Church of Christ was very quiet in comparison.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say is when they sang though, and we had a good singer. We had a good singer. I mean, I was in the altoing it up, and you hear the soprano. It was beautiful and melodious. But I'll say there was a lot of differences among them.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of conflicts within myself, and I would bring up a lot of questions because things didn't always match from denomination or from church to church. And I was like, but we believe the same thing.
Right.
So, there was a little confusion there, but yeah.
That's the upbringing in that.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's lit. Miss Harmony?
It's wonderful to hear y'all's backgrounds. I feel like I know you so much better. Sister Harmony grew up in the church, okay? My family is a long line of ministers. So Bishop Cecil A. Malone, who I mentioned earlier, my great-grandfather, he actually, we're originally from don't let me get to lying. Tennessee.
Okay, yeah.
But our family traveled and we ended up in Ithaca. There's a long story behind that, and I'm not the family historian. That's Uncle Mo for y'all. But my great grandfather ended up coming to Ithaca, New York, and he ended up building this church with my great grandmother. It's called Bethlehem Church of Jesus Christ, and it still exists today. And he put his life savings into this church that he built. And the name of the street is after him. But my great-grandfather was the epitome of community. So, the police would come to him if, this young man says that he knows you and X, Y, Z. Well, Bishop vouched for him. Come on, you got to stay with Pastor, but Pastor, get him in orders. That's who my grandfather was. And I really loved that because my family was always about family and community, which is what the church for me is being in relationship with the community and being willing to serve, right?
Yeah.
And so I grew up apostolic. which means that we believe in the apostles' doctrine, which is also just an extended branch from my understanding of like Kojic. But I grew up, we speak in tongues. It wasn't like we were very strict. Like what I'm wearing today was definitely not acceptable. You did not wear jewelry. You did not wear makeup. Women did not wear pants. You had to wear stockings. Your shirts had to be, to your elbow. Courting was really difficult. If you were courting, you had to have a chaperone at all times. And so it was really layered. We had a lot of things in our church, but music was definitely there. My father was an organist. God rest his soul. He passed in 2015. But I come from a very musically gifted family, hence the name Harmony. I won't sing for y'all today because she got to sing tomorrow for Easter, and we just had Good Friday. Yeah, very, very musically gifted, and we're grateful to God for that. But yeah, grew up very, very churchy. Very churchy.
Yeah. And the first thought I got, because we all said it in this, is like the idea of the church. And like I've heard that in regular conversations, because first let me say this, my approach, I'm not a theologian. Theology is not my, but I do have experience, personal experience, lived experience that I can speak from, cultural experience, But I've heard people say the church so many different times. And I wonder, like, what does that mean? Right, like what does that mean to us? What does that mean to other people? So let's dive into that. Like when we say the church, like what do we think about that?
Ooh, I feel like that answer has changed over the years.
Yeah,
like
how that looks.
It used to look different, I think. And you always hear the church isn't the building, it's the people. Like that's God called that we are the church. I think now as an adult, it's very much the building and the practices and the traditions for me. So if I refer to the church, it's usually almost like the stronghold of what you're expected to do based off of the rules versus, the people and the compassion and the grace for which like Jesus would give. So that's how I see it.
The church has changed in multiple ways. I feel for myself, especially in my own journey, I feel as though the church for me has always been family, right? Literally everyone in my family served in some like evangelists, ministers, deacons, reverends, you stand on the stage, usher, the usher board and all, so all the things. But I feel like the church is supposed to be a safe haven for people who are lost. I feel like it's supposed to be a hospital to help us like to grow and to be nurtured and to be loved and to be seen. I think the church is also, yes, still a family, but it's also supposed to be about community. And I think sometimes we forget about that. And I feel like we'll touch on it a little bit, but about like shame that comes in the church. First of all, I love you guys so much. If I did not say that before, I love you guys so much. But why I really wanted to be here was I had talked to Brother Herb about y'all. Let's talk about sex, baby conversation and all the things that I was like, nah, we're not getting to the core of this. But I feel like sometimes the church is also definitely a place of shame. And there's so much ingrained in that, especially for people who grew up in church versus people who visit.
Yes.
And so if that's your regular place of worship, sometimes it can be difficult to really name the church for what it can be or like to see the beauty behind it if you grew up in it. So I feel like every year for me, the church changes.
That's what that means, yeah. And I definitely feel that too. And the church for me, I think it's all those things. It's like it's different based on who you're talking to and your experience, right? But I almost see it as like the building is the church for sure. That's a part of it. And then outside of the building, it's almost like it's a way of thought. It's the way people think. It's almost become its own entity or its own kind of persona when you think of the church, right? And from that comes like church people, and things like that go along with that.
Yeah.
And how people almost like call that out. Like you can be a part of the church. And the church too, it almost, for many people who are both religious and spiritual, it's almost like this omnipresent feeling, like this pressure that comes along with what comes with that. And sometimes that's like, it could be for better or worse. I'm not saying that's negative or positive, but it's like this feeling or this experience or this place that you go to, even though it's not a place. Like when you say the church, people aren't meaning the actual church.
Yeah.
They mean all the things that come from being involved in church activities, And so that's how I have seen it. And I also see it, I think, for Black folks, like the church is a rooted entity. Like it's a part of the upbringing. It's like the hub, in communities. And so I want to ask y'all, or we could just talk about, like, we know it has influence for sure. How have you seen churches use that influence? And I even will start with you because you have come up, and the family is in the church.
Yes.
So like, how has that played out in your life? And what community influence have you seen the church use?
Well, the church is also an attitude, right? It's an attitude of a lifestyle that you live. And so there's an assumption that comes with you being a church person. That you're kind to everyone, that you look a certain type of way, that you don't engage in or participate in certain type of things. And I'm grateful that today's churches, I feel like, are evolving. And but the way I grew up, okay, so it was really hard to be a young person in the church. What made it difficult was the restriction, right, and then the lack of conversations, right. So we would never talk about sex. We would never talk about courting. We would never talk about, how to live a Christian life and still have fun, and like what that looks like and why you have to look a certain type of way. And so the current church that I am at, they're really invested in communities. So they're constantly doing the work to reach out to the community. And what that looks like is like food pantries. It's having all these talks about like our health and reaching out to, like, we have a lot of Cornell alum and doctors and I see collegiate people there that come and are professors, and it's educating the church about like Black history, women's history. Like, we're very involved and we take the time to like do a lot of outreach. In the church that I grew up in, it was like, we're not going to get those heathens. If they want to come to the church, then that's something different, and we'll help them here. But in regard to the influence, like, it was really ingrained in us that we have to show love. And it was crazy because the way, like, love was sometimes wrapped in this very toxic behavior. And so love was like, don't tattletale on people for sexual abuse, or don't, we hide behind this. And so it was always, it's conflicting, right? Yes. It's very up and down. And so, but in the same breath, our influence was to like, go outside, be a part of the community, and encourage people to come to the Lord. And so what that looks like, I often tell people that it's like car insurance, or like your grandma. Your grandma, you go to her house and she'll be like, baby, do you need anything? And you're like, no, I'm all right. Right. She comes back 20 minutes later. Baby, you need anything? No, I'm good, Grandma. Baby, that's 10 minutes later. You sure you don't want a piece of pie, baby? No, man. And by the time, this is the fourth time they done brought you something. I find that that's the way we like offer church. It's like, hey, you interested in coming to church? No? Okay. Come back again. Hey, you want to come to you want to come to church? And so I try to have that approach, but also like really meeting people where they're at, and seeing people for where they are in their walk, whether that like it's so mixed because sometimes it's used against people, but in the same breath, that's also how like people are called into discipleship. And so it's a happy medium. Like it depends on who you are as an individual, right, and the lifestyle you decide to choose and the path that you decide to walk. But you have to know it for yourself. You have to know what your relationship is in Christ for yourself, and then be bold enough to be like, yeah, I understand that this is a thing and like church hurt does exist. However, this is the God that I know, and my God is love, and this is what that love looks like for me. So,
some too. I'm gonna come back to because you talked about not title telling as being like a form of love. So you got to go back to that because that's gonna be a good topic. But the community influence piece, it sounds like the church you're at now is more progressive in doing stuff, like more so inviting and making it fun and educational. And doing stuff that people would want to show up to. Yeah. That wasn't really my case during the time. I think I haven't been back, but what I've been seeing, it's been more of that. But for me, it used to be exactly what you said. The way we influenced in the church that I was at is we almost had this standard of what church was or church people were, which I never, whether from just a lack of caring or whatever it wasn't like intentional rebellion, but I never really fit that. So for example, we at our church, we would do like communion, yes. Communion was like you hand out, you go down, pass out trays. It's the bread and you getting the grape juice. It wasn't wine. Dang, I wish it was the wine. I'm like, I was trying to get lit at 12, but nah, for real though. But the people. So we had a guy who would go and pick who would be up there, and he always picked the people who had on like a button-up shirt or a suit. He never picked people who would be willing, who were dressed in jeans or a t-shirt. So what message is that saying? Like, oh, you're not. Because you don't look like this, you're not good enough. Yeah. And so that influenced people to feel like, okay, I don't belong here.
Yeah. Right.
And that wasn't intentional. You know what I'm saying? But that type of energy carried throughout, like the things that we would do in a way that we talked a lot, like the secular world. Those people. This, that, and the third. I'm like, those are people.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like
that's my family.
Yo, it's like, what? That's us. Yes. Like if anything, we should be there. You know? And was that similar with yours too, Mo?
I went to so many. It all looks different depending on the church you go to, right? But from a young age, I watched as like the mothers of the church, or the deaconess, all the evangelists, however they call, would go around and do communion and pick and choose who they hand it to based off of how they were dressed.
That's terrible.
And I tell you, when you're young and you pick up on things, I'm like, that's not okay. That does not feel like God to me.
Yeah.
But she tried to skip this family, like these young teenagers and the mom, who were all dressed in like jeans and t-shirt, not knowing that was the guest pastor's family.
Ooh, Lord.
And she had to call her back, like, excuse me, you missed us. And she's like, oh. And I was like, oh, what does it remind me of? Now, you remember when God sent the prophet to go get the new king? And he went to Jesse's kids, and he looking at all the kids, and he's like, the strong one must be him. It's like, no, that's not him. He's like, look with the heart. And David out there playing with sheep, like this scrawny little thing. He's like, are you guys not teaching me this? How are you behaving this way?
Right.
How are you acting like this?
Right.
And it's like, it really depends on the church and their form of relationship, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people want to win souls, but don't think forming a relationship is the way to do it.
Sis.
It's like, wait.
Yeah.
Would Jesus just come up to you and be like, you're wrong and you need to come follow me? Or he's like, let me get to know you. I'm interested in where you're at. Like, what's going on?
This not is even who I alone. Am. Like, Jesus was with who? The prostitutes. Jesus was with who?
The liars,
the cheaters,
the thieves,
heartbreakers. Yeah. No,
the tax collectors.
Run the road, sis. Run the road, because Jesus he wasn't even at the church.
You feel me?
He was outside.
He
wasn't inside. He was outside
with all the people, with us.
Jesus was dangling.
He just said, like,
Jesus was dangling. Facts. Jesus was out.
He was outside.
He was outside, y'all.
I got so accustomed to seeing the influence in such a negative way. It was just always targeted toward those who don't look like the Christian.
That set the stage for trauma. Like that type of energy is what set the stage. Like, it became this thing where this is the standard, and you have to uphold that, like, at all costs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you don't do things like tattletale or like snitch on somebody when something ain't right, because it's hurting the image of what the church is supposed to be.
You'll make him look bad. He's an elder.
Right.
What?
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
For sure. That was that. And even like going back to what I was saying before about the community influence, I would have loved for us, like, I wasn't, and shout out to one of my he's my guy now, but he's my former player athlete. Just how we met, Isaiah. He one of his main things is like he wants to show how being, like, for him, because he identifies as a Christian. I ain't saying no last name, so I don't want you putting all this business out there. But he wants to show how, like, that can be cool. Like, you could listen to Nip and listen to Dirk and you could be
Word.
And you could still be like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Man.
But that was not us. Like, we weren't out like, what I remember, right? I know people are gonna be calling me like, "Hey, Lee said that." It's like, hey, it's what I remember. We wasn't out, like we wasn't in the places where people really were. Like we were like the church on the hill, and a lot of churches take that vibe, like you got to come to us, you know, and it's like that's hurting our influence.
True.
You know, and that's I think that's a part of the problem, and that once again, that isolation sets the stage for trauma.
And it's that elitism kind of mindset. It's like, no, you must be separate or set yourself apart from the world, right? And especially when you're young and you're in school, so you tell me I can't be friends with my friends?
Right.
And I was taught if they aren't willing to come to church with you, they're not
your friends at all.
For real? That was a thing for y'all?
What?
Yeah. Man, I felt like I lived two lives. I remember in high school, I really felt like I was two different people. Like I didn't get saved, right? So saved in our church meant that you were baptized in the name of Jesus and you were filled with the Holy Ghost with the evidence of speaking in other tongues, and then that you lived a life that was holy and sanctified and pleasing unto God, which meant like no drinking, no partying,
Yes.
You're good. You're good.
Lord,
Right. And so it was listen, I got saved at 17 and I struggled a lot because I was like, I loved God. I knew I loved God and I knew I wanted this gift, right?
Yeah.
Like we make this gift, like we set it up on a pedestal like it is it's ecstasy. You know, like you want the gift of the Holy Ghost, right? If God gives it to you, that means you are worthy. And so to me, like when I got saved, I remember it was like a ton of us. My siblings had got saved before I did. And I remember I got saved on a Sunday and I went to school that week and I put on pants. And my bishop was also my uncle, and he used to be the person in community, so he would come to the school, right? He would come to the high school. He would sit in the parking lot, like the principal knew who he was, like if the superintendent knew who he was, everybody knew who Bishop was. And so I remember I was wearing pants, right? Because I hadn't adjusted and acclimated to the fact that I have to wear skirts all the time now, and it's cold outside. It's wintertime. You're not trying to be outside, man. Bishop was sitting there in his little Cadillac and good morning, praise the Lord, Sister Harmony. And I just knew. I just knew it was going down. But he didn't say anything to me until Friday. Friday we had Saints Instruction. And so he pulled me into the office and he said, now, daughter, I know that you just got the Holy Ghost, but baby, our sisters, we wear skirts. And I remember being so like the fear of God was so real. Like I feel like today we don't fear God, and growing up, like fearing God was like literal fear. Like oh my God, like oh my God. But to fear God really means like I'm afraid to live a life without God. And what does that look like? I feel like I wouldn't have a lot of purpose, and I wouldn't like what's my drive? What's my mission? Why am I here? What is the purpose of this all? But like, yeah, growing up in the church was tough. Like that divisiveness, and then like if you want to talk about trauma, somebody give me some water. Because I'm parched. No, but like for me, I remember. Well, first of all, as a black woman, we just got it bad in the church. I don't care what nobody say. We have it bad in the church. And as a young woman growing up in the church, too often was I called fast. And I'm what do you mean I'm fast? Like fast, like speed?
You the Flash?
What are you saying? I'm fast. I know I can kick his butt. Yeah, I can, No, I was called fast because I was always around young men. I only have 2 brothers. Like, I'm hanging with my brothers. My sister didn't come until 5 years later. And then by the time I could touch her, I was 10. But, like, we were labeled as fast. And then I was outspoken because I always asked questions. And I was like, I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense. Or I would question the preacher while he's, preaching. And so, you're taught to be silent. And I remember, unfortunately, it's way too common, but in the church, women are often abused by men in power in the church, ministers, deacons. And unfortunately, that has been my story. But I remember thinking, like, why do I have to be quiet? Like, and I'm a pretty loud person by nature. Like, I get really excited. There are a lot of things that bring me joy. But I remember being silenced, and then like not only being silenced, but then it was turned around and flipped. Like, it was my fault that this person did this thing. And so like, we need to break that habit. Like, I don't know why it's so acceptable in the church. And it's like, you know, if you say anything, so like if my parents said, you know, don't say anything about it, be quiet. If I go against what they say, then I'm being disobedient. If I, you know, so, and you're like, well, what part of this is right and what part of this is wrong? And like, this person is empowered. We hide too many things in the church, and it's really unsafe. And so it, like, the trauma that builds up in the church, and then we wonder why people run away from God, and why people refuse to bring people closer to God. And I'm grateful that I've been able to overcome, so that I'm like, you know what? God may not be for you, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to give you the information. But it's difficult.
Well, that kind of goes back to what you said too, what we were saying earlier about how like the elitism that comes with that, right? Like, you got to keep the good church, the church's good name. It's like on everybody's shoulders. But to go back, because that was going to be my next question about what type of traumas does the church, from kind of like that atmosphere and that or produce. And you know, you touched on one around things with sexual abuse, and I'm wondering if. Doesn't have to be your personal story, but in general, if like things that you've seen or think, if you want to dive deeper into that, and then if you just said you know, Mo Bayesian. So once you get the Bayesian accent, you know she got something. You know she passionate.
It did.
Oh shucks, I ain't know this.
I didn't even know.
Man, I'm thinking back to the public like disgrace, the way in which they would share all the information about someone in the church because they did something wrong. They sinned. And it always got me as if the pastor or the elders or the deacons weren't sinning themselves. You know what I mean? It was like I remember one church I was in, one girl got pregnant and her parents allowed her to get an abortion because she was very young. I don't know the situation. I don't know if there was any sort of abuse or whatever happened, but that's what she and her parents decided. They shunned them from the church. They announced it to everyone, shunned them completely from the church. And I mean, they were high-leveler people. They weren't the highest, but they were up there. And then everyone acted like they didn't exist anymore.
Yes.
And I'm like, wow. And I mean, the talented, like, bright, beautiful, and there was no love, there was no compassion, there was no encouragement, there was no standing by or helping them through. Complete cutoff. And I've seen it personally occur, and I'm like, wow. And I thought we were called to love. It just happens so often. If a man cheats on his wife or whatever, the entire church knows. But there'll be those same predator ones in there sleeping with everyone.
Everybody.
Chasing after the young ones. I got chased after when I was in high school. I'm like, I'm not even grown. Why are you after me?
Right.
And people act like that's not happening. What? But because, well, he preaches. And it is infuriating sometimes to watch that the church will make those kind of decisions and embarrass people and shun them and never cover them in love or keep it, you know, more private. Like, things don't need to be a secret. It doesn't need to be something you never discuss, but you don't need to put people on blast without their consent, without them bringing it forward or sharing, this is the struggle I'm going through, pray for me. It was never like that.
And that's like one of the traumas that I think, one of the things I want to pull out that you said in that was the difference between how men are treated and how women are treated, right? And for me, I think patriarchy is one of the traumas that came with me from my church experience, just being honest. And as y'all have heard and know, I am anti-patriarchy because it's one of those things that we have done, especially in America, that's the zero-sum game. In order for someone else to win, someone else has to lose. So racism is like that. Sexism is like that. All of those things. Capitalism is, in a sense, like that, even though I still operate in capitalism because, you know, you do want to make money. But it's like, hey, I'm being honest. So those things, like how if something happened and it was wrongdoing, there's one particular instance that's too fresh for me to say names and give all the details because, you know. But I remember somebody who was a higher level in the church cheated on his wife. It's well known. Like, you know what I'm saying? And you know me, I just be, because I don't be in it, I'm just sipping my tea, watching, seeing what's happening. But it was almost like she did something wrong. Like the treatment. You know what I'm saying? It's like she was shamed. It's like, dang, how come she couldn't keep a man?
They probably threw the Bible at her.
Right.
Yo,
Were you
like,
not giving him what he asked for?
and that became a thing. Or even things
not
like
serving.
this, what used to hit me, and it still happens to this day. And I'm just calling it out because I'm giving my own personal opinion on this, because I think patriarchy in the church is reinforcing the things with sexism. The women. So we would have an event, right? And the women in the church were the ones who were like cooking, making the meals, doing the thing, like, making it happen, which is
Throwing
cool.
it down.
And keep in mind, there's some, like, there are people. It wasn't like they forced to do that. They're like, yeah, this is what we do. They just brought into that, and they would serve the food. The men would eat first.
Always.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then afterwards, when everything was done, you know who was in there cleaning up that kitchen and making it happen? The women.
Yeah.
Who did that?
Always.
Right.
And I used to be tight because I, was going to church with my mom. It was just me, my little brother, at this church because my people separated. So I'd be tight. Like, what? I know what she got to go home and do? Like, nah, I'm going to be in. I used to go in there and be like, yeah, I'll help you, bro. And they used to almost be looking at me like, bro, why you in there?
Sit down. Go be with them. Yup.
Yeah, I just couldn't. And so that, like, for me, the trauma was like, it's the patriarchy. For people who prescribe to that afterwards, like, this is how it's supposed to be. Like, that came from their experience with the church, So yeah, that's one of my traumas. I got another 4 or 5.
Ooh.
But
See, I remember as a kid when I used to get in trouble, my mom used to say, like, put me on punishment, make me go read the Bible. And so now as an adult, right, I'm like, I don't know a lick of Bible. I'm gonna be very honest. And I'm so serious. And I refuse to read the Bible now as an adult because I look at it as a form of punishment.
Yeah.
But it's very similarly to that, like, women are like get in trouble or whatever have you, but then what I fault the church for is like not supporting them in regards to like therapy. I'm like, we are so broken sometimes, and had it not been for a praying grandmother, right? Like, oftentimes we say that, but I'm like, no, I'm grateful that my grandmother really did pray for me because of her own brokenness, and she tried to protect me from those things. And my mom has tried to protect me and like raised me to be open to all things, which I'm grateful for. But like, we do not give people the space to heal.
Yes.
And so I'm like, the church, right? I said in the beginning, the church is supposed to be a hospital, or like this is where our lost people are supposed to come to find their way. And I like it baffles me how much we shun like therapy, and how much it's not like, it's so frowned upon to even think about therapy.
yeah, because it's like, just pray it, talk to God.
Right.
Like, I got the answer.
Who made that anti-God? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
As if wise counsel was not a gift.
Right.
From
like, God didn't give them that gift.
But I feel you there, because my kind of punishment was almost like anytime there was an issue or problem and I try to bring it. My mom was very religious, and I say my mom is very religious. But there would be times like within the family, if ever I have a concern or a problem, you're not praying enough.
Right.
It's
somehow your fault.
You're not seeking God enough. Like, God isn't in your life enough. Like, I am now not a good enough Christian because normal human problems or worries or anxiety, it's almost like that doesn't exist. I'm like, I'm an anxious person, and I did not know, because the whole time I've just been told I wasn't a good enough Christian. But now I'm like, I have a complex. You know what I mean?
And then reinforce that.
It's like, it's a slow grow to heal that back. And not allow that to be over me. It's like, that's not the case.
And that went back to like the community influence thing. Like, I always, and even where I used to work, because there was a religious school, I used to say, like, a lot of these things that we almost like hide away from talking about, we should be the ones
at the
who
forefront,
lead the conversation,
Right.
because we're supposed to be the people who have the compassion, the empathy, and create the space and invite people from all different walks to be able to do that. We're not living that way. We're hiding from it, and that's a problem.
Right.
Like, we're not actually doing what we're supposed to do when we should be.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, that's on us.
Yes.
And now we are reinforcing the things, like, people don't talk about sex, and now you have someone who gets pregnant because they didn't learn about things about safety, and then we shun them for doing that, and we reinforce all the things that come generationally after that,
Right.
and take that and magnify that times 100,000, and that's what's happening,
right?
Sometimes I'm like, if God really came down
If he pulled up,
if God showed out,
if he pulled up,
if he came outside,
if he popped
I'm like,
out.
if you really sit and assess yourself, you trying to tell me you doing a good job? Are you doing a good job?
But they would say they are.
But see, the thing is, I used to get in trouble because I'd be like, I feel like that's a man-made rule. I'd be like, where is it in the book? Is it in the book? I don't see it. I remember one time I went to, he was a different pastor servant at the time. And I remember I had gone to him and I took this scripture and I was like, listen, it was something about confession or about like, I felt like he was being really mean to just me. And so I was like, you're supposed to show love and kindness. I don't know. I found some scripture and I like threw it at him. It was like, now what? You know?
Like, I don't read the Bible, but I'm going to read it for this.
I did my research. I looked up all the words. You know, you go to the back of the book and there's an index and it's got the word love and how you're supposed to treat your neighbor and all that. And I was like, look, you're not doing that. You're not good. You know? And then he like went through the whole scripture. Like, you know, he actually read the Bible. But and he read it and like put it in context. But I was like, okay, but what I had just done was like taken pieces of the Bible and applied it to my issue.
Right.
And that's something that is so common in the church is that we're taking this to apply it to this situation and therefore it makes sense because it's in the book. And I'm like, that's not true because, you know, like in the book it said we're not supposed to have tattoos. We're not supposed to eat pork. We're not supposed to, but y'all show us that. Like, you know, all these things we're not supposed to do, but y'all selective in what you want to, you know, actually apply. And so I would always question like, that seems like a man-made thing. Did you just come up with that? But like, yeah, it's really hard it's really hard to encourage people to come to the church because it's like I used to be terrified to invite my friends like to church because I'd be like, dang, as soon as I'm like, I don't want you to come because I don't want my grandma to fuss at you about your skirt being too short.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't want them to fuss. You know, come as you are. They did come as they are. Like that's what they had. They don't go to church. Their skirt is up here, and like it was your fault that this young man is now lusting after your flesh.
Like, is it?
Yeah.
It's not his fault that he is looking at me in this in this way, and that he desires my body, and that he is not consecrating himself and asking God to get him together. Why is it about me? How did my wrist become sexy? Like my ankle? Girl, you better show that ankle. It's sexy. You know.
I ain't gonna lie, something about some ankles and all that.
It's the calf for me.
It's like, dang, you see them ankles? But nah, but you're right though. That goes back to once again, like it never was on us. Like it reinforced it. Like if something happened and it was around any type of like something sexual, right? And it would be like, yeah, but why did she wear that? What did she do? What did she do to attract him? Like it would be
right.
And that always at the time, I'll be honest, it wasn't a rub for me at the time because I wasn't with all the cultural things that kind of reinforced that. I didn't recognize that was the problem. Yeah. Now I look back, having like younger sisters and knowing like that's a problem. Like, oh no, because I remember I got checked one time. My younger sister, I'm like, yo, what you got on is too tight. We not going. She like, too tight for who? She like, who's the problem?
She stood her ground.
Yo, and I'm like, you know what, you're right. Yep. Like, you know, there's nothing wrong with you wearing these sweatpants because they really were. They're just too tight. I'm like, no, you're right though. But that thing it was reinforced in the church heavily. Yeah. Like, nah, you listen, you got that skirt on. If the associate pastor looking at you some type of way, that's on you. So that goes back to the trauma. And go ahead. I see the Bayesian coming.
No, because sometimes the preacher would just be up there and you bring in a friend and they go in on your friend. I came in with my friend. Pulpit. You know, she's a lesbian and because she dresses a little more masculine, he went off about gay this and gay that and da-da-da-da. And I was like, hated that. You don't know why she's here, but the fact that she came here and you decide to push her out as much as you possibly can. And I'm like, I've experienced it just by wearing earrings.
Right.
I had braids, and I remember my mother was like, you hear what the pastor said? No, I surely did not.
Not at all.
I didn't listen to a thing he said. I'm like, why would you attack me as a visitor? It's like, yes, I clearly want to be a part of this one. This is the church.
You know what's really specific about that, and I feel like we haven't really named it, is that we're talking about Black churches. Because I'm like, I want to know where we learned this type of behavior. I really do. Like, if I'm like, because I mean, I've been to the Unitarian church, and I'm like, this is a nice service, like y'all, I don't know everything y'all talking about, but that's nice, like I've been to different denominations, but I'm like, it's always been, unfortunately, in Black churches that I've always like, I'm like, if I wasn't so sturdy in my own relationship with God, or like had taken the time to sit with myself, like I'm so grateful to God for 2020 and the pandemic, because it forced me to be like, oh, you didn't have your own relationship with God, you had their relationship with God. God, let me holler at you real quick, say word, this is how I feel today, like, and I don't understand why you did this, can you help me out? Like, God, you can talk to God about anything, but it drives me insane, like the culture of shame. I'm like, who did that? And what, like, I feel like that goes back to enslavement, if we're being really honest. And I'm like, that's a master's mentality.
Yes. That's exactly what I was thinking.
I mean, go ahead and talk about it.
Yes.
I feel like you would be.
You know how they always, like, growing up, but back in the day, you can't be acting out. You can't be out in the street making me look a fool. You got to behave, and you get whooped and this and the third. And it's like, of course, that was stemming from not acting out in front of white people so that you don't get snatched up or hurt or, killed or whatever. And it's just gone on for generations. But it's the same. You got to look a certain way. You got to act a certain way. You got to be a certain way. And now we're our own problem to ourselves.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
It became to where it's like the book we read, The Four Agreements, and it talked about how, like, the book was given to us in terms of how we're supposed to be, and then, like, the person who reinforced this is how it's supposed to be are the people in power, and then eventually you're yourself reinforcer of the pain, right? So it's like, that's what happened.
Self-domesticate.
You self-domesticated. So, truth be told, and this is what I was going to bring up, I wrote a note, because you had brought up how folks, like, use parts of the Bible to reinforce their own point. And it's like, that is, so the Black church itself started in slavery. Like, that was the start. And that's because when we came here, we actually weren't, well, we kind of had there was the missionary and colonialism, trying to conversion, because we did not, Christianity wasn't a thing when we were stolen, right? And so that came here, and that's what we had to be able to stay strong. But the way that was taught to us was through the lens of white folks. Right. And they used to use the language in the Bible to justify slavery. Like, that's a fact, right? And so a part of the shame culture, going back to enslavement, like you said, when you think about it, it's like, women were being raped, snatched, all these good things. And so, you wasn't going to look a certain type of way or do this, because that greatly increased the chances of whatever happening to you. Right? And so, but now that's no longer as much of a problem because we know how the world is, but we still are self-domesticated. Yes. We still are doing those things to our people, like, don't do this, don't act like this, look this way. If not, you're a target. And that has been passed down and never challenged. And a part of the thing, and this is one of my biggest hurts that actually led to me stepping away from the church and like having to do my own self-discovery, is when I used to really want to ask questions, because I was the same. I used to ask hard questions, like, hey, I'm going to be honest. And I remember I asked this one time, and I remember I got this look, and this is the answer I got. But I was like, hey, so I was born in Northern Africa, what we call the Middle East, and I never was exposed to Christianity. I grew up as a Muslim and died that way. Why would I burn in hell? I mean, but I asked. I mean, I'm asking the question.
That's a great question.
Help me understand. I'm like, didn't God put me there? Well, he set me up for hell. And so I just remember, like, the strongest, I remember the person who said it, I ain't gonna bring it up. He was like, gave me this angry, like, who are you? You don't question God. Ooh. And I'm like, huh. He's like, that's just how it is.
Really?
That's how God made it. I'm like, huh.
What?
And that, I remember looking at that like, okay, if that's the best answer I can get, then maybe this is not the place for me. Because if there's not a, hey, I don't know, which was really the answer. It was
right.
a bit,
I surely have no clue.
Let's explore this. That would have helped me.
See, that's it though. That's the key though. Like, why can't you just say, I don't know? Like, why do you have to have an answer? I remember asking about this was my hard question. I said, if God was in heaven and he decided to make earth, okay, cool. He already had angels and then Lucifer. Okay, so then he created us so that we could serve him. But now you're saying that based on the life I live, and the choices that I make because he gave me free will, my consequences is either heaven or hell based on the life that I live. Who asked me to be here?
Ooh.
Who said it's up to be here?
Who told me to be here? And why am I given all this responsibility? And then the other question that was really taxing, and I would just be like, just tell me you don't know. I would respect that. I was like, if God knows everything, why did he let Lucifer have iniquity in his heart? Right? This is how Lucifer became the devil, right? Because he had iniquity in his heart, and then he got cast out of heaven and created war. You knew he was going to start the war. You knew he had iniquity. Why didn't you nip that in the bud?
Early on.
Why did we have to go through all the, and instead of people just saying, I don't know, or saying, ask God. Because I think it's an abomination to tell people that you cannot question God. It's not that you cannot question God. God loves questions. It's the way in which you come and address God, right? If I pull up on you like, yo, what's really good? Like, you know, what's your natural response? Like, hey, man.
Square up then.
But if I say, hey, man, I heard this and I'm really concerned. There's a difference. You have to reverence God if you're going to address God. You can't just be like, God is all knowing and everything is for a reason. And if we say that, we have to believe that, but also trust that. And so it used to drive me insane because these are the questions I'm asking at 9, at 10, and like that doesn't make any sense because why, if he knows everything and he's all powerful, why did you need me?
Right.
And you know what you do when you shut that down, it's like, and that is a part of, once again, like some of the trauma, or like the reinforcement we're doing for folks is you're shutting down creativity, exploration, and self-discovery, which people need to do. Like, you don't want to have robots. Like, I still know people today who their faith isn't there. It's just like their parents. And they never, like, they haven't done any self-discovery. And that's not genuine, right? And so when you shut things down, when you ask, that's a good question. Right? And if you don't know, like, the best thing I learned to do, because I never used to do this, is, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to try to find out for you. Or let's find out together.
Yes.
But when you can't do that as a community, like when you just kind of put up this wall and this shield of defensive,ness, that actually pushes people further away. You know?
It's almost like the goal was to control, not to really teach.
Absolutely.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like I have to make you think I know.
Right.
And keep you, in order and under my hand.
That was heat.
That's really what it is.
That was heat.
Because I had similar questions, and most of the answer was always like something along those lines. If you never heard about God and you die, what happens? And I always got, if you never had the chance to hear him, you're fine. It's like, what? It's only if you heard him and then chose not to abide. What? I just never got it. I was like, you're 78 years old. You speak a completely different language, and you're in a different culture, and it has nothing to do with Christianity. And you're telling me someone pops up, a random missionary, tells you about Jesus, and you're like, what? No. And now you're going to hell?
Right.
Yeah.
Why do we condemn people so?
I never understood.
And who gave us that authority? I'm like, is that in the book? And
Where
if
does it say?
I'm like, I'm pretty sure that God made all these people.
Yes.
All of them.
And there's no other avenue. You know how they say, like, well, Jesus is the only way? It's like, that doesn't mean this is the only way to find him. Maybe it's me.
That's why
you better go ahead and preach. That's the whole word right there.
I have preached twice in my life. I was 12 and 15.
You better go ahead.
And you know who told me the words? The Holy Spirit.
Hey,
you better let the Lord use your daughter.
I remember this story. Did you tell a story about that?
Not on the podcast.
Okay, I ain't gonna put you on blast. And you know what's and it's crazy because, like, at the same time, while we're expressing like our hurts and traumas and whatnot, it's like the hard part for me was like that actually, and why I wanted to work and be better. It's because of the things that came from that were productive. Like my principles and morals, like the things that I stood on, like really came from that. Like the men there and how they operated, like when like they just did certain things. And it still carries over. Like you said, the first day when, even though I was an angry soul my freshman year, I still was, so you walked in there, I dabbed everybody.
It's like, I met him once, right? And he just didn't, he wasn't present. He was just like, who are you? Get away from me. There was a block. The next time I saw him, honestly, I was like, we'll never be friends. Truly, I was like, okay. And he was getting hyped up. I was like, okay, you think he's dope, but I see this. This ain't it. I see him next time. He comes into the cafeteria and daps up every guy, hugs every girl at our table. And it was like full of black people. I'm like, this man don't know all these people. Like, what? And he came and gave me a genuine hug. And I'm like, Are you close to your grandmother?
Were you like raised?
Yo, you did ask that. Yeah, you facts asked that. Yeah, but and the crazy part about that was like that was how like you walk in, you greet, you respectful. I'm holding the door. I'm doing the things like that came from because you know my I love my family like especially like my dad's side for all the I don't know if you ever seen that picture. It's like your mama's side, everybody's all nice and dressed up, and it's like your daddy's side, and everybody got the do-rags and the change. That's my life. And legit though. So like all the men of my pops, like they smooth, but we wasn't like gentlemanly. You feel me? But in the church, I learned a lot of those things. So I wanted to work because like, oh, y'all gave me great principles and morals and values. But these other things are hurting people like stuff you mentioned, your stories. Like, but okay, I wrote in the notes and we never circle back. Do you want to, you almost got away with it. Miss Harmony, you mentioned a great thing about, because you talked about many traumas. So the last trauma is around sexual abuse. You said that's actually why you wanted to bring from the last episode to education in this. So wondering if you, just in general, what are some things that you've seen or know, or what can we do better? And then we can take that last part of what we can do better as like one of the last questions and go with that. Okay.
I feel like we need to have more conversations with all of our young people, just about like your body in general, right? And like how to take care of your body. Because of my own experience with abuse, I'm so protective of my nieces. My niece is 4, and I'm like, no, we talk about it. This is your vagina. Like, and her name is Ayana, but I call her Millie, right? She knows the difference between those two names that like her TT, her auntie is calling her versus her mama or other people are calling her. The same thing with her vagina, right? So I'm like, we actually grew up and it was called a tutu. And so... Sorry, don't touch my tutu. You know, it was a tutu, and so
we talked about this.
And so I call Millie's, you know, her vagina, her tutu. But like when I'm talking to her, we have conversations now at 4, and I'm like, you don't let anyone touch your vagina. You tell TT, you tell mommy. Like we have to have these conversations earlier. And I remember in the church, like I was late to like get my cycle. I didn't get it till I was 14, but we had this tea party for the young people, right? We had young people service, and we do games and things like that. And we had a whole conversation about our bodies and like how to wash your face, how to take care of your body. I feel like those are things that need to be implemented more regularly. But in regard to abuse, again, the silencing, right? So because my trauma started when I was 6. I can talk about myself. I won't talk about other people. Mine started when I was 6. And the way it was told to me, like, or how this journey happened was we're playing house. We're just playing the adult version of house. So I'm like, okay. Like, I didn't think anything of it. And, like, when my mom would be like, where were you? I was playing house. You know, like, what you mean? Everybody, we're all playing house. And so, but, like, house was this code for, like, all this stuff that was going down. And so, but my mom never questioned or never asked. And then when I would ask about like, hey mom, what happens? Like when somebody touches like your tutu, you know, and it'd be like, what? You know, like, and then you'd be like, oh, you don't say anything because you're about to get in trouble. It was never a conversation. I remember my mom and I hadn't had a conversation about sex or her own abuse until 2019. I'm 28 years old. You know, I'm like, why are we just not having a conversation? You know, and so it's because it's so like, shh, we don't talk about that. Or if something does happen, it's let's sweep this under the rug, or we don't want people to know because that's not godlike. And so young women, I feel like we have a responsibility to protect our young Black women. You know, Malcolm X said the Black woman is the most unprotected person.
Disrespected.
You know, disrespected. Thank you.
Person.
You better say all of that. And so, you know, I'm like, it's very true. And I'm like, we have to learn how to vouch. And so because of my experience, unfortunately, you know, my niece is going to have to suffer with her TT constantly checking her body, and that might cause trauma to her in a different way, which I have been nervous about. But my trauma influences the way I would raise my future children, you know? And so I'm like, you know, you can't let everybody hang with your babies. And, you know, where are your kids? Checking, because in the church, too often there are more things going down in the church than y'all realize. Okay, the children know.
Well,
They know a lot.
well.
Not only do they know, but they're experimenting.
Yep.
Can I get an amen?
Hey,
And so
yes,
what
yes.
I'm trying to tell you, no, let me stop. No, but for real, like there are a lot of things that happen in the church that are not talked about. And I'm to be honest, if anybody asked me like, what is, tell me about your sexual experience, I'd be like, I learned everything from the church, you know, like, and it's great. Like, you know, no, I mean, it wasn't great, but I learned a lot.
The learning was great. Like what you learned.
No,
like like what you know now and what you can tell other people.
Not what you've been through.
Yes,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
right.
yes,
Not
yes,
what
yes.
I've been
Yeah,
through.
but what
Because
you
I'm
know
like,
now.
you know, we sneaking in between pews. We in children's church. We, you know, I'm like, we have to be diligent
Yeah.
and intentional about having these conversations and protecting our young people and our young men too. Because sometimes abuse happens to young men and that goes unsaid. And, you know, I'm like, I've been surprised by like, wait, that happened to you?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
it, like never, we don't talk about it because then, you know, then I'm not a man or, you know, it somehow toxic masculinity is a real thing, you know? So but I'm like, we got to talk about it.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
have to.
because things that happen or things that you for young men, it's like things that aren't talked about or aren't checked early. Things that
Yes.
almost are like protected is not helping them. It's not educating. Like unless you tell them like, hey, yeah, no, you don't do this, or like this is how you actually should be interacting and not interacting, and this is what
Right.
consent means, and this is what
Yes.
all those
Yes.
things that people need to learn that the church, because you have a built-in space to speak to people, you know, a built-in space to connect when you have the church community, because there's a level of safety, which is why people don't question like who's with, oh, they with such and such from the church, oh, it's
Right,
good. 'Cause it's
right.
supposed to be this built-in safety.
Yep.
So because you have some of those built-in things, because we don't trust a lot in the black community outside of like that.
Yes.
There's not
Yeah.
too many places where we feel welcomed and invited and trusted, you know.
Yeah.
But the church is one of them. So with that, we should use that to educate. Because when you don't, people are gonna find out.
Yeah.
Right.
You know. So yeah, and I appreciate you being vulnerable, sharing that. And what I want to ask, the last thing though, and this ain't the part where I sneak in the
You
episode.
never know with him. I tell you.
If we were gonna leave something, because this conversation talked a lot about a lot of good things. If we were gonna leave the folks with, here's from our experience a word of advice or what things that we hope would have been done or could be done when it comes to navigating or dealing with church trauma, what would we leave folks with? Like, where do you want to end that?
I would say just personally, I wish like share your experience.
Yes.
It makes it make so much more sense. Like if you telling me not to, or you know you shouldn't, doesn't really help if I don't understand where that's coming from, right? And like I get that a lot of things are unhealed.
Yes.
So I'm like, honestly, start working on your healing, but share that experience, good, bad, or indifferent. It is so helpful. Because all I can remember is the few times they talked about, you know, just sex alone. Like your body will feel things regardless if
Yes.
you want to talk about it or not. And mine
Yes.
was called Nuka Nuka. Like it wasn't,
Y'all
I
making
don't
up
know
all
what
kinds of stuff.
vagina was.
Nuka Nuka.
You know, and I learned how to wash it and clean it. But
Yeah.
anything else, I was like, I don't know these things. And the one time I remember the church actually discussing that, we were so much older. We were like late teens, early 20s. I'm
Yeah.
like you said, kids are doing all kinds of things.
All
People are getting it in and on it. You know, I wasn't a part of this life, but I knew it was occurring, and I didn't fully get it. And I'm like, share your experience and let them know what to expect as their body
Yeah.
changes. Normalize it where it doesn't feel weird or you feel like you'll get in trouble.
Yeah.
If you share something, it's like, this is why people keep it to themselves. They always think you're going to get in trouble. Like, no, protect your kids
Yeah.
and share experience. That's,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
I would echo that and say like the power of conversation is important, but also lean into why you're uncomfortable by the conversation, because that might be some unhealed trauma that you need to unpack, and be okay with like supporting people in their journey to healing if that requires therapy. Be supportive. Also lean into the why behind things, you know. But not only that, like, you know, if we're gonna use the Bible, let's do it correctly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's do it correctly.
Yes.
Let's find the stories and let's tell that, like, you have to teach people very similarly to school, you know, if you're a kinesthetic learner, if you're, you know, reading is your thing. Lean into the everything, into the discomfort, and then take the time to like be at peace with the journey and how long that journey takes to do the healing. Teaching people in their learning language is important. Because it wasn't until my pastor started acting out like the stories of the Bible that I was like, oh, Jesus did that. It's powerful versus just like we just reading the scripture. I hated reading. I don't, it wasn't doing anything for me. So teach people in their learning language and like set time aside for young people, but like be intentional because like I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
So it's not like take the time to create those spaces. Have a tea party at 5 years old and let's talk about our this is how we take care of our bodies. I thought that was the best thing in the world. I was like, sucks that I'm 14 though. I know how to do that now. But it would have been nice to have this, and it's nice to teach my little sister this. We just be intentional and like if you don't know something, say you don't know.
Yeah, I love that. I love that for sure. And I would say if I had to leave something, it's like this. I think there's so many places, especially for Black and brown folks, where you feel like not wanted or rejected. And like, if you have that and then you intersect with whatever other demographic it is, whether you be gay or lesbian or poor or whatever, and like you are seeking to be welcome somewhere, and then even if not saying it explicitly, you get to the church and then you feel rejected again because of things like your story you just told me. Like someone walked in and they were all of a sudden going hard on, their lifestyle. Like, I would say we have to change that. Like, we need to be a place that welcomes people regardless, and we need to like let people bring their full selves because it's going to look different. We can't have this like you have to be like this assimilation type of mindset because people are. Like, it used to be where, honestly, some people would mold to that because they want to fit so bad. Yes. But now people are like, all right, then forget it.
Yes.
Like,
let's walk away.
Forget it. And it's like, that's the last thing you want because of what we say we're trying to provide, right? We're just edifying people. So that'll be my message to that. It's like, we have to create the space.
It's funny. It's almost like, how we were raised to like, you better behave or you're going to hell. Like that mindset. It's almost like now just envision if Jesus is sitting right next to you. How would you speak to that person? How would you respond to the situation? It's like, no, really, envision he's right there because I bet he would change a lot of what you do. So yeah.
No, and even with that too, since you got Miss Harmony here, they probably sitting here looking like, what in the world? Well, church, what in the hell? Let me stop playing. Are they talking about today?
Go straight to him.
Listen, let me stop playing. Listen, we might be right.
We might be wrong.
But at the end of the day,
we just young, black, and figured it out.